Hey there, I'm Carrie, social worker and founder of PlayMotion Kids. Welcome to Wait, Am I Saving the World? This podcast is for the people shaping childhood at home, in classrooms, and in our communities. Around here, we talk about what it really takes to raise the next generation of changemakers through conversations about child welfare and development, parenting, education, and everything it takes to show up for kids without losing yourself in the process. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Carrie, and welcome to another episode of Wait, Am I Saving the World? And I am so excited to welcome Laura Smothers-Chu to the show today. She is the founder of Joy in Dementia, and I am super curious about that name. I know we will get to it because I know people are thinking not a lot of joy in that, Laura, but she supports long distance caregivers that are navigating the emotional and the logistical realities of dementia care. And this all started after her father's diagnosis while she was working in healthcare, and she learned firsthand how overwhelming and how fragmented care systems can be, especially for families who are trying to advocate from a distance. So today, she helps caregivers understand resources, planning, and advocating in systems that sometimes make it harder than they have to be. So, thank you so much, Laura, for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on your show, Carrie.
So, I let's just start with your story because I know that this is a reality for your family and this is how you got into this coaching. So, tell me a little bit about why you started Joy in Dementia.
Sure. So I was 28 years old. I was an only child, and I lived 3.5 hours away from my parents. And my dad called me one day, and we talked fairly regularly. And he said, I can't balance my checkbook. And I just remember being like, "What?" Because he taught me math when I was a little kid, and it's like basic arithmetic is, budgeting and balancing your checkbook, and so I thought, there's something wrong," you know? And he felt like he couldn't tell my mom. So I started doing some research, and I, found that I thought like, how can I help from 3.5 hours away? I don't live with him, right? And I did find through my research that like that's a pretty clear sign of mild cognitive impairment compared to regular aging. Um, and so I looked for resources, and I really couldn't find anything that was specific for caregivers that did not live with the person with dementia. And it was really discouraging. Not only did I feel, it basically felt like a sucker punch to the heart when I found out what was happening, but I worked behind the scenes to try to get him to have a cognitive test. And so we went as a family. And then when he was diagnosed, formally, I guess, diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, I looked on my phone to see like, okay, like what are the basics of this? And immediately I saw like, the lifespan that's predicted. And I was just like, that's when I felt the sucker punch to the heart. And so yeah, I tried desperately to find somebody to help me. Like, what are my next steps? Right. And I really couldn't find any resources to basically hold my hand through the process. And luckily, as you mentioned, I was in the healthcare industry at the time. Had a career in healthcare, so I knew who to talk to, and I started to create a plan for my family because my mom was currently not ready to accept my dad's diagnosis. So I had to work from 3.5 hours away, like behind the scenes. But yeah, I created a plan and framework for my family and the steps that I could take from 3.5 hours away, things that I was not able to find just doing a Google search. And I hear from my clients now that that's still the case. We don't have tailored resources for caregivers that don't live with a person with dementia. So that's why I started Joy in Dementia. I wanted to be that person I was looking for.
Yeah, that's amazing that you decided to fill in that gap, and I have so many questions just from just from your intro. I am curious about this because your father reached out to you, so it sounds like he knew he was concerned. He's like, "I know I should be able to do this, and I can't," but he didn't feel comfortable sharing it with his wife, your mother. Can you tell me a little bit about what that was like? Was he also trying to take care of her during that time, but also knowing he was having trouble, or can you just speak a little bit more to that?
Absolutely. As a kid, I always saw my dad as the protector of the family. He was sometimes like the buffer between my mom and I. And I also, he, for example, put together binders of like when I was doing my college search, like binders of colleges and all the things I was looking for. And I mean, just like put all the practical stuff in very easy to understand format. And we went through it together. And actually like that might be inspiration for what I do for my clients as well, right?
You're like,
That's
"Here's your binder."
yeah, like, I don't do a binder necessarily, but, like, I walk them through the steps, right? And, like, I'm there with them, right? And so, and my dad and I always had a very close relationship. I I don't know, I had a lot of different emotions there, of course, grief and, absolutely confusion at that point, and I think for us, as long distance caregivers, it's like we're kinda listening to our parent and we're like, "What? Like, that's so weird." And then we kinda try to just it's almost like a shock, like we don't really know what is happening right now, so we kind of put it in, like, the back of our brain. We're like, "We'll revisit that later," you
Right.
know?
Put that in a
Um,
box.
yeah. And then I'll update him on the regular things, right? But yeah, I do think that in a way he was trying to protect my mom because I don't think he knew what was happening either. And so I think, like, he felt that I would be emotionally able to handle it and that I would do the research and figure out what's happening, and I would essentially like I ended up doing, stepping up for the family and really, really guiding the family like he used to.
So I'm curious because I know you typically work with long distance caregivers. So the person with the diagnosis might have somebody there that's caregiving, but you're supporting the person who needs to support them both, really.
Yeah.
So do you find that dynamic a lot? Is that a lot of the role of a long distance caregiver is being able to manage the dynamic between now their relationship is changing.
Yes.
And what does that look like? Yeah.
Absolutely. So with my clients, we cover all the dynamics and I know like when people are first contacting me, they have questions about like the practical, the logistics. What can I do so I can feel less helpless, so I can feel less guilty, right? Because I don't live with them and I don't really plan to move in with them, right? And that's like a really good point actually that you said because I really feel like long distance caregivers get a bad rap because we don't immediately move back in with our parents to help. And in my experience and with my clients, you never know what the dynamics look like, right? Like I know that I personally um was and am a much better caregiver when I'm actually not living with them, right? And there are actually advantages to being a long distance caregiver that I've discovered that no one tells you, right, in the dementia journey. But I think it's important for us to know. But yeah, I think like it's the dynamics and the changing dynamics between everyone. So, like, I don't have siblings, but some of my clients do have siblings, so there's changing dynamics there, right? And I think, especially with a dementia diagnosis where there is no cure, right now, there's this huge fear, and I think in a lot of ways, we all kind of, like, resort to, like, our inner children, essentially, and the past tensions that have existed in our relationships. Like that absolutely happened with my mom and I, because it's like you can't control anything that's going on with the dementia that a fact that it's a terminal disease. And so we end up like lashing out towards our loved ones because we feel such a lack of control. And so yes, like that's one of the many things that I help my clients with if they're, looking for support there.
Right. So, will you tell me a little bit because you are now serving as who you wish would have existed when you were looking for this. So, can you tell me a little bit about maybe what you would have been looking for and what you did find or didn't, lack thereof, right?
Yes. Yes. I think especially with dementia, because there's such a stigma about it in our society, not just in the US, but in the world. And I think a lot of that is because we don't have a cure and we don't have, we feel that we don't have control over it, unlike cancer, for example, that we get sucked into this stigma, and so we don't know what we don't know. That's the main issue, right? And then so not only do we not know what we don't know in the situation with dementia, but then there's also this like multitude of information on Google, and there's like so much that you can't sift through it. And that's where I saw the big gap where there was like nothing tailored to long distance caregivers because our experience is different than my mom's, for example, right? Like my mom, and that's what I really, really aim to teach the healthcare industry to know is like in general, they default to sending all of the resources and things to the spouse who lives with, the parent with dementia in my case, right? And so my mom was just trying to get through the day to day. She's basically in survival mode. So there's no way that mentally and emotionally she has a capacity to start thinking about, oh, do we need to revise the will? Like, do we need to have a financial advisor? Like things that are way, down the pike, but need to be done because, at that point, my dad was still able to express his wishes for his end of life and things like that. And so, like, that's the best time to talk about that stuff, right? And it's like, and meanwhile, you're trying to deal with the shock of this diagnosis, the grief that there's a known timeline for, your spouse in this case, right? I mean, it's just you're dealing with such an emotional roller coaster of um of challenges that it's like, how could I possibly think about like 10 years from now and trying to support our family. So yeah, I think that it's really hard to learn anything about dementia from a long distance caregiver point of view. So that's what I'm trying to fill.
Yeah, I love that. So, did you have any big surprises when you started looking for information? Like, what was your biggest takeaway, I guess?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna name any names, but, they're like main dementia websites that
You can message them to me later.
that you would think there would be support, and the general impression that I got, and I still feel like these sources are so out of touch in their recommendations, but, I got the impression of like, "Oh, well, if you don't, live with your parent with dementia, then you should stay out of it." Right? It's like, for me, it's like, no, I mean, back then, because I was like, I need to help in some way,
Right.
I have the time to do this that my mom does not have, even with, at the time I was, at a full-time job in downtown DC, but still, I was not, I was not technically in survival mode on a day-to-day basis with my dad, right?
And
Whereas she
right.
was.
And you also I can and I mean, and I don't know your parents' specific experience, but, my mother has dementia, and she did live with us for a couple of years, and so I can just imagine that having somebody not in the day to day that could actually handle some of that would be amazing because the person who is doing the caregiving is trying to make sure they don't walk out the door or leave the stove
Yes.
on
Thank
or flood the
you.
bathroom,
Yes, like, you
Yeah.
have so many more challenges technically than I do on a daily basis, right? In this
Right.
case.
But having support in those areas
Yeah.
where you can is absolutely amazing. And so I can just imagine the dynamic between also that being your spouse. And so
Yeah.
they're having to deal with a whole new reality and, what their future might look like. And so having somebody outside of that to say, this is what we need to look at. This is what we need to prepare for. Yes. I mean, I think that's amazing. So I firsthand know how valuable the service is that you are providing.
That's an excellent point, Carrie. And I wanted to point out too, it's I do specialize in serving long distance caregivers. I'm fairly sure I'm like the only one in the dementia field that specializes on serving long distance caregivers, which like blows my mind because I'm like, why aren't we doing this?
You're like, what's everybody been doing until now?
It's like, but the people that wanna help, like, why aren't we empowering them, right? And so, like, not only am I empowering long distance caregivers directly, but I've noticed that in my experience and also just kind of empowering myself with these ideas and everything, and the way that I presented it to my mom, so I was not stepping on her toes, which I think originally is why when I saw on the dementia websites, they're like, "Stay out of it." That can happen sometimes if long distance caregivers aren't being mindful about what they're sharing, right? But when I work with my clients, I teach them how to share, in a thoughtful way, but having done a majority of the research and the vetting and all of that legwork that like you for example would not have had time to do, right? Like even if I had said like, "Hey Carrie, I think you need a financial advisor." You'd be like, like when am I going to do that?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
how am I going to
Where
do
do
that?
I find one? What am I looking for
Yeah, like
them to
I mean
do?
you
Yes.
yeah, it's just like all of this like additional labor just fell on your shoulders. And I feel like that's exactly what the healthcare industry does. And like it's just so short-sighted to me to be, why are you throwing all the resources on this person that's barely surviving, right? Because of the nature of dementia, and you're not empowering other people around them. I work to empower the long distance caregiver, but as a result, it lessens the labor and the stress on my mom, for example, and also I think it, like, helps my dad because once we can figure out this stuff ahead of time, like, we do the long-term planning ahead of time, then I have more I have more bandwidth and I can show more compassion because I'm not so stressed out like towards my parents and make the memories that matter because as we know there is a shortened timeline, right? So like let's make the most of that time and not have a crisis at the end when that's like the worst time that anyone wants to do this will stuff and it wouldn't even be honoring my dad's legacy because at that point he wouldn't be able to express what he wants, right?
Right.
So
Yeah,
it really has a ripple effect from what I've seen, and I think that's what's been so rewarding about this work.
for sure. So, okay, I want to backtrack for a minute because we didn't name any places that weren't real helpful. Using quotation marks. Besides the fact that there was a lack of long distance resources, caregiving resources specifically, did you find that maybe there was a gap between what people think is available and what is actually available across the board, no matter what type of caregiving situation we're in?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is because to me, it feels like the people that are making this list are they're sort of writing down what they learned in textbook or something or training, but they don't have the actual lived experience. So an example of this is one of the articles I found when I was first searching for what to do was, oh, run errands for your parents or, send some money home. And I'm like, I live 3.5 hours away. Me running errands is not realistic. None of this stuff was realistic, or sending money. I was 28. I was barely surviving in downtown DC, And so, yeah, for sure. I think in our healthcare industry, it's sort of these textbook solutions aren't working anymore, you know? And I think it's really important that people with lived experience are the ones that are offering this. So and another reason too, like another thing that like really annoyed me was I kept reading that every person that has dementia is different and everyone has it. I'm like, that's not helpful for me because need I need some kind of structure to function here, you
Right.
know?
You're like, "Give me the
And so
framework."
yeah, so like I really wanted like a step-by-step guide essentially, at least to do the practical things, you know? And so yeah, I could find that. So that's what I create basically.
Oh my goodness. I love that. If I am with you. And everybody might be different, but there are still things that just make sense, I would think, across the board. The other thing that I'm thinking about when you talk about running errands, and this might look different in 15, 20, 30 years, but right now, the generation that would be dealing with this, like your mother might not know she can have her groceries delivered. So, and I'm thinking, so you might not can run errands, but what the long distance caregiver for sure can do is help set up some things that make sense that you would be able to do and know about. Whereas somebody in that situation might not even be considering that that's an option. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I liken it to just because I've had experience with both. Um, that like it kind of reminds me of when I first had a newborn. And I had to remember all the supplies and all this stuff. It's just you're already so overwhelmed emotionally that like it's like it doesn't fit anywhere else. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? So what I've heard from like my mom, for example, hey, if you could just like say offer something specific instead of saying like, for a neighbor to be like, oh my gosh, let me know how I can help you. Like when people would tell me that when I had a newborn baby, I was like, I don't know. Like,
Right. Show up, wash the dishes. I mean,
yeah, just like, because it actually does take more mental labor to brainstorm how you need help
yeah.
versus someone offering, oh, I could bring you over dinner. Would you like that? And be like, yes. you know? It's way easier to do that. So I think that's also a something to bring up too.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, 2 things, but let's start with this because you mentioned it when we first started talking. Regular aging versus mild cognitive impairment. So if somebody is listening, can you give them just a list or a quick summary of what they might be looking for if they are currently concerned about a loved one?
Yes. And so basically the general rule is if this symptom is happening once in a while, but it's not happening on a regular basis, right? So for example, my dad mentioned that he couldn't balance his checkbook. And I was like, that's really odd because he's been able to balance his checkbook for like his whole life, right? Or at least since he learned how to, use a checkbook. But we also need to consider, do they have a whole lot of stress right now? Are they learning something that's very difficult? There could be some other factors, but that combined with other symptoms that are specific helps to kind of be like, okay, that's compared to regular aging that's showing signs of MCI. So I would say, so with my dad, I like put that flag in my head, and then he mentioned it again the following month. And I was like, okay, this is a major thing. And then I had also looked at the other symptoms too. And I was like, okay, it looks like it's more MCI than aging. And I actually had to show that chart to my mom to have her before we did the cognitive testing for my dad because she kept being like, oh, it's regular aging. And like, no, it's not. Like, that's a very common myth that there are some things with aging. So, for example, one example for aging, actually, elders get this crystallized intelligence. So anything that, they still have regular aging, like they still have excellent vocabulary, they're still speaking the way that they normally spoke, right? Versus MCI, like you're starting, my dad was starting to forget words, which was very odd because he also had a very high level vocabulary. But I would say if you're noticing something out of the ordinary, and it's also an advantage to be a long distance caregiver because we don't, again, as you mentioned, we don't see our loved one every day. So we will actually pick up on that stuff more than my mom did, for example, right? Because we just don't see them as much. And so it's easier for us to notice a pattern or to be they're acting kind of strangely, you know? Another thing that I noticed about my dad too is that he was never particularly emotional, I guess many father figures of that generation, but he was starting to get irritable about things that he normally wouldn't get irritable about, so that's another example. But I would say trust your gut. If you're noticing that not just their behavior, but their personality seems a little bit different, that would be a sign. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very helpful. So, jumping forward a little bit, what is the first thing if somebody learns that their loved one has a diagnosis of dementia, mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, whatever the actual diagnosis is? What is the first thing that you usually recommend families do? Is it the same across the board? Is it custom? What does that typically look like?
So I would like in an ideal world, because there are things like if someone is insufficient in a certain vitamin, it can cause kind of similar symptoms. And so if only we could be, hey, dad, like you want to make sure that you're taking enough vitamin C. Can you go get a blood panel? Right. Like, I feel like we could do that with our generation, but perhaps not with our parents because they'd be like, why? You know? And
I
also,
mean, like, that's not gonna help anything.
yeah, and also with the downside is primary care physicians do not get training in how to work with people with dementia or elders and, elders that are experiencing mild cognitive impairment. So, and I know for you and me, it's already hard to get a blood panel to be like, could I get a blood panel on this specific vitamin? Like, why? Because then you're paying, they don't want to charge you extra. Like, it's just this huge obstacle. So I would say, like, in an ideal world, you want to make sure that your parents are getting enough vitamins. But I think realistically, the step I would recommend is to go to a neuropsychologist and get it's called a MoCA test, but essentially it's a cognitive test. There's also shorter screenings you can get to. So there is a center. They call them like daycare centers, which I don't love because it's elders, but there's a community center near me that actually does really quick screenings. That might actually be ideal. So now that I'm thinking the cognitive test, the MoCA cognitive test might be a little bit overwhelming for someone, especially that's experiencing mild cognitive impairment. And I kind of wish I did this instead. So, if there is a community center that's nearby that provides care for people living with dementia, not as patients, but as clients. Okay, that's very important that they're considered clients. Ask them if they have a super quick like screening test that they could do. I think that would actually be the best first step because I think it's less stress on the family, less stress on the person that's experiencing the symptoms. And it also gives you an idea of maybe we need to look more into this. And then if you want to say, hey, primary care physician, because many of our parents only go to a PCP, they don't go to a geriatrician who has the full training, say, hey, we did this screening and there might be an issue. So can you check for these certain vitamins, right? That's what I would recommend, I would say.
Yeah. That
Um,
and I would not have thought of that, but of course that makes total sense because you wanna roll out in anything else physical,
yes.
and a lot of times people are just getting this diagnosis from their PCP. And I'm thinking through this in my head, I'm like, "That is what we did," but because we went to a neurologist. That was our next step, yes. So, I'm like, "We did it, but we fumbled our way through it instead of"
Yeah,
instead of
and
being
so did we. So
yeah,
again, just like I didn't know what I didn't know. You know
right.
what I mean? And now that I know of some resources, and unfortunately, community centers like that are not available everywhere. So if you're in a community that doesn't have a center that for people that are living with dementia as clients, and they don't have a quick screening that they can do, then I would go the neuropsychologist route just because doctors are not familiar with the MoCA. MoCA is the best. It's MO. It's a acronym, and I forget exactly what it stands for, but it's MoCA,
Okay.
um, and that's the best test. I would say the best primary test that neuropsychologists can use. Yeah, I would say that would be a good first step. And then one thing popped into my head, and I forgot what it was. It'll come to me,
Okay.
but
Yeah, just jump in when it pops back in.
I will.
Yeah. So, I think I know the answer to this question based off of how you even got started, but do you think our culture and our society values our caregivers enough? Long distance, in person, and maybe it even is the child that lives in town and they are running errands, but they're not living in the home. Just caregivers across the board. Do you think that we value them enough?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I think that's the case with a lot of invisible labor that women have tended to do in our society. And I think that is starting to change a little bit with moms, and we're getting tailored resources for us. And it's actually been very empowering for me. You know, I have a toddler that's 2.5. It's been very empowering for me to actually write down the things that I'm doing because I'm like, why am I so tired? And I'm like, oh, I did literally all of these tasks, right? And so, yes, I do not think that anyone is valued enough. I think that the healthcare industry is, oh, we value caregivers and they throw all the resources, but they're not being mindful about who they're giving those resources to. I think we do this weird thing in society where we're like, oh my God, like you're a superhero because you're doing that. And I would never be able to do that. Right. But then we give the caregivers the recognition sometimes, I guess. And it's usually we who understand the invisible labor. Right. Um, but we don't have the power. For example, we're not their employer who can give them time off to take care of their parent, right? Or even pay them, right?
Yeah.
For example, in New Mexico, I just posted a reel about this on Instagram where they're doing free childcare for
I saw that. Yeah.
everyone living in the state. And I was just, wouldn't that be amazing if we're taking care of our parent, or my mom's case, spouse, we get paid by the state. That's the kind of support that we need, right? It is nice to be recognized, but also in the things that help us survive in this society, we need those things,
Right.
like money, for example, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Job, you
Yeah.
know?
Because
And
you're doing a good job.
yeah,
That's
right.
nice, but it's not real helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the same thing, right? It's like, oh, and I was even being told, "No, stay out of it. You're not, don't do anything so you don't do a good job." You know what I mean? We all, because we're lacking these things in our system, we all need to support each other, but in tangible tasks and not just be like, "Oh, let me know what you need," you know?
Mhm. Right. Okay. So I have my handy dandy pencil here, but we're going to pretend it's a magic wand. And I'm going to hand you a magic wand. So tell me, what is one thing that you would fix if you could just wave it and make it happen?
Oh boy.
I know one thing is hard. You're
Yes.
like, let's fix all the things.
Well, I think the main answer is I wish there was a cure to dementia, because then there would, and I know I'm not the only one to say that, but because there is such a stigma to it, I think we would have a lot more understanding in our society. I think there is something that people that are living with dementia call the law of disappearing friends. And it really is true. I don't know if you've noticed this with your mom, but we just, as a society, we don't understand how to deal, like how to even be with someone who has a terminal disease that does not have a cure,
So we just
right?
so we just don't. That's
Exactly. So we avoid it because it also reminds us of our mortality, right? And we just are like, oh well, we don't know how to do that. And I can tell you from doing research about cancer, society used to have this same attitude about cancer until we, found a cure. And even then, right, I'm reading about this and it's like, but people don't always have the best quality of life, even though there is a cure, right? But at least their friends aren't leaving them when they get
Right.
this terminal diagnosis, in general. So I think that's like the obvious answer, but I think that would solve a lot of our issues. Yes. um,
100%. I agree. I agree with that magic wand waving. Let's just cure it and we'll call it good.
exactly.
We'll just be all done.
Yes.
So so you've talked about the healthcare system and you talking about cancer a while ago made me think about this. But looking at systems in general, or maybe we can even just talk about the healthcare system because
Great.
a lot of people are navigating the healthcare system and it might not be for a dementia diagnosis. Do you have some suggestions about how to advocate for yourself, for your child, for a loved one within the healthcare system?
Um, I have suggestions. I think I talked about my dementia journey quite a bit. I will also address my fertility journey because that's also where I experienced the gap in the system. It's definitely educating yourself about the condition, whether it's dementia or what you can find out about fertility. In my case, like with fertility, there's so many different things that could be causing that. So it's really important to find sources that essentially summarize that information well. And I was able to find a book that was recommended to me that listed all the possibilities. And it just so happened, in hindsight, that I had one of those possibilities in the book. And so we really have to educate ourselves because I think in a lot of cases, not just with fertility, but doctors are trying to meet with you as efficiently as possible. Or they're trying to provide the treatment that helps the majority of patients, right? But what we're finding is that not everyone is in the normal distribution curve.
Believe it or
And
not.
so if you're finding that we're not all the same, so basically trying to figure out and talk to specialists. That's what I found is most helpful is talking to specialists, creating a relationship and making sure that that person, so even with my clients too, I think it's so important that it's a good fit with patients and clients, with doctors or specialists, right? Because you're essentially working together to find a solution, or multiple solutions, and you need to make sure that you feel listened to, you feel respected, because I think especially with women's care, it's like we've been ignored, we've been dismissed for so long, right? Like we weren't even part of healthcare research until recently. They kept just doing studies on men, and they're like,
Like
"Oh
like
wait,
we're just
women are different." Like,
yeah.
duh,
We're not just little
Um,
men. We're not just
we've been telling you that.
right.
We've been telling you that, but you've been dismissing us as being crazy because you don't have the education to help us with that. So I think definitely finding specialists, and the way that I found my specialist was through a community. It was actually a Facebook group of the people that were going to my fertility clinic. And, I wrote down like I've had this many miscarriages. The doctors say that I should get pregnant, but I'm not getting pregnant. Like, what did what was your experience? And people chimed in and it was really helpful. Right. So I think finding your community for sure with this particular thing that you're trying to solve and creating relationships with the specialist. And if you don't feel like you have a good working relationship where you feel respected, then find another specialist. I did that actually with a few of my nurses, a few of my doctors, because I think, especially with the dementia journey, fertility, like there's so much emotion involved in that. And you really need to be respected in this process. And yeah, and is essentially empower yourself with that information so you can advocate.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's so good. Because I know I have loved ones that they just say, well, that's what the doctor said. And I love that. I am not saying don't listen to your doctor, but also if you have educated yourself on what's going on and you've done some research, it's okay to ask questions and it's okay to understand why they're recommending what they're recommending.
Yes.
Yes. And if you don't like it, it's also okay to go talk to another specialist to see what their recommendation would be because
Right.
it really is the practice of medicine. It is a practice. And just like you mentioned,
Yes.
you're working together to figure it out. It's not
Mm.
the doctor up here telling you what you should do against maybe even your own better judgment. So,
Yeah.
yes, I love that. Thank you for helping people, empowering them in their healthcare journey. So, Laura, if you would, because I know you are doing amazing work, would you tell everybody where they can find you, how they can work with you?
Sure. So, I think I've been clear about this, but I wrote my mission statement. I'm very excited about it. So I'll
Oh,
just
yes, let's hear it.
tell everybody. So I help long distance caregivers navigate their parents' dementia one positive and practical step at a time. So they can discover that joy is still possible, take care of their parents, and stop putting their own dreams on hold.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing. And I think that also touches on I was teasing earlier about the joy and dementia, but you're right because in all things give thanks, right? So it's you might be dealing with something difficult, but it's okay to laugh. It's okay to enjoy those moments. And just like you mentioned earlier, taking some of that stress away so they can make memories with the time that they have left.
Yes. And
Yeah.
it's also changing the perception that we all have. Based on media, there's this tragedy narrative of dementia. Dementia means death. There's no joy in it, right? There's like all these things that have been like shoved in our minds, right? And it doesn't disappear, it lives there, right? And so it actually shades our perception. So when our parent gets dementia, we immediately think death and no happiness, right? Which is really not true. And you'll hear this from families. So Bruce Willis's, wife just said that there's still joy in dementia, right? And it comes from our relationship with our parents. It's that person does my dad did not go away. I just got to know a different side of my dad. I got to, learn a new way to communicate with him. And once you see that new world, it's less depressing. Like, yeah, it's still sad because it's a terminal illness, right? But being able to see those moments of joy, like make it easier to get through, right? And why would we not want ease right now? Why
Yes.
would we not want joy right now?
Yes.
Um,
I'll
and
take the easy button for sure.
yeah, so, like, when I meet with my clients, I kind of, they'll tell me about what's going on, and I'll point out and be like, "Oh, that's actually lovely that this happened. Do you feel you were able to really make a connection with your parent?" And they were like, "Yeah, actually, I did." Right? And so once you start to kind of open your mind to that new perception, you start to see those moments of joy more easily.
And can celebrate them a little more. Yes. Okay. So tell everybody where they can find you and learn more about your work.
Absolutely. So I think you'll write out the website, so I don't need to
Yes.
spell it.
Yes.
So I'm at joyindementia.com, and I offer free consults for 15 minutes to talk about what you're going through on your dementia journey and how I can help. And if we feel like it's a good connection, then we can talk about how we work together. But yeah, I really love my work, and um I still chat with some of my clients too that they've kind of graduated from working with me, but we have a good relationship, so
Yeah, for sure. I imagine you, once you create that connection, it never goes away, helping them through such an important part of their life. So,
yeah, I think one client was like, "I feel like you're a family member, but, like, not like my sibling that's not helping," right?
right.
Family member, like the ideal family member that you
Right.
want to
You're like
help.
that cousin who I really love, but they live far away. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, exactly, because I think I tried to go to a therapist too, and I was going through this, and it's like, not even if therapists have not had lived experience, it's really hard for them to really give you tailored advice, right? And so that's what I offer is being able to be with you in these moments of whatever they are, and also helping you feel empowered by teaching you the specific steps that you can take so you don't feel like it's all vague and ambiguous and frustrating.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Well, thank you, Laura, so much. I hope you have a good day.
So, you too. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the show and share it with someone who cares about showing up well for kids. And if you feel called to create real impact in your own community through movement, mindfulness, and whole child learning, you can find out more about becoming a certified PlayMotion Kids instructor at playmotionkids.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, don't forget to make a little time to play, and now get out there and go save the world.